This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and joining me on the show today, he is currently an Associate Professor of Teaching Philosophy at The Ohio State University, and as we are also about to discuss, the Director of the newly formed Visible College. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Steven Brown. Steven, you okay?
I'm doing very well. It's good to see you, sir.
Good to have you on. You might have the record for guest returnee appearances in like a short period of time, because that must be what, like 3 and 4 months or 5 months,
something like that. Yeah, I like it.
That's not bad. Yeah, so get like a hat trick ball, as you would get in the UK. So yeah, good to have you back on. And genuinely, so many folks have said, like, when you've been on, get Steven on more often. Good to hear him. I think a new voice, some fresh ideas, some fresh thinking, some fresh perspective always goes down really well. And people know you best, I think, being on here at the moment for the talking about the Nazca mummies. Mm-hmm. As we found out, you've gone from believing in it to full government disinformation campaign in a couple of weeks. I joke, so go back and check those out, folks. But we're going to talk about some different stuff. We'll get to catching up on the Nazca thing as well, but a lot to talk about. And I want to kick off with kind of what have you been doing then the last few months as you've kind of, is it fair to say you've moved away from that Nazca mummies topic, or you've at least expanded?
Well, it's interesting. So the Nazca mummies topic remains very interesting to me. I'm still engaged with it. I still talk to various parties in and around the Nazca sphere pretty regularly. But I am not a direct scientist myself, right? So I have to kind of wait for the people who do the science to process the samples they have and do the analyses they have. And so it's not that I'm not interested. It's just that none of the pieces outside of my control have moved in a way for me to have much to do. So I'm kind of waiting on things right now. But yeah, I think we talked before about how I had a pretty significant relationship with the New Paradigm Institute. In particular, they have this very important Citizens for Disclosure project going on, where they're trying to get people all over the world, but especially all over the United States, engaged in advocating through their political representatives for things like the UAP Disclosure Act to get passed. And, I talked to Danny Sheehan, and he, in particular, I was expressing some concerns about the independent review board that was included in the UAP Disclosure Act and how it wasn't broad enough. In particular, I was very concerned about the absence of psychologists on that board, because, regardless of what is about to be disclosed, it will be disruptive psychologically to a lot of people, right? Even if it's just a top secret anti-gravity program, which is a crazy thing to say, just a top secret anti-gravity program. If it were such a thing, then there's all kinds of social fallout from that. Why haven't we been using this to solve our energy crisis? Why haven't we been using this for, evacuating people from crises? Like why has this been hidden from the public? So there's really no scenario where disclosure comes out and everybody goes, it all makes sense. Nothing to be worried about, right? And so I have this worry, and many of my colleagues have this worry, about ontological shock, this experience of kind of going from not knowing what's going on to knowing what's going on, or even just being aware that something unknown is going on. It is very jarring. And so a lot of what I've done is just collected people around that space, people in academia, people doing research, people kind of adjacent to academia, who are in the public policy world and finance and stuff like that. I've just been working to collect them and get us talking to each other. And, there's some things that we're working on. In particular, we're working on some material on ontological shock, trying to do a study about specifically people in academia, and the experience we go through as we discover the significance of these things. A few months ago, I guess it was, a couple of months ago, there was a discussion about what we wanted our relationship to the public to be, because at that point we were kind of not a secret society, but we weren't public. We were just talking privately to each other, and we all kind of agreed that this is an important moment for this kind of group that people have called the Invisible College, which is sort of the academically scholarly serious people who have been looking at this forever on the fringes, largely in secrecy because of the stigma, that the Invisible College needs to become visible. It needs to become something that people can see, that there are serious academic scholarly folk working on this. And so in a nutshell, that's all we're trying to do. We're not trying to argue for any specific conclusion about what's going on, what the truth is, what it might mean. Each of us has our own perspectives. Each of us has our own ideas about how to do this. We're kind of unified around this singular idea that we need to be visible as we do this. And so we have a website up now. There's a very modest YouTube channel that just has a few talks from this event that we ran at Yale that I think we're going to talk about. So I've been working with this kind of small team of academic folk to get that up and running over the last few months.
You say going around obviously collecting academics, like, so if you're this Pokemon guy almost, you know, jumping about, and I feel like you almost have to be like throwing balls at them to catch them because they're so reluctant to join you. Has it been a struggle to openly have that conversation? Because it must be like when you're trying to tell one of your friends you like UFOs, because you're trying to ease into the topic to the point you hook them to say, come and do some work on it. And I'm guessing come and volunteer your time to work on this. And what are those conversations like?
So it's been really interesting. If people go out to thevisiblecollege.org, on the people page, you'll see there's the people with whom I have some kind of formal arrangement. I mean, it's not very formal, just like, hey, are you willing to be on the website? is essentially all it is right now. And then there's a list of public figures. I just want to make it clear, we're not taking any credit for anybody, but we're certainly not taking any credit for the public figures, right? All we're trying to do there is call attention to people who are already very visible, talking about these things, and just kind of collect that in one place. So those are not people who we have a relationship with. The kind of research associates that we list at the top of that page, those are some of the people that I'm talking to. Now it's only some of them. So what I have, because there are people who are not willing to be visible right now. So there are invisible members of the Visible College. Yeah, let me tell you, in general, my experience has been, I mean, it's an old school social network, right? Like I have a friend who's working on this. It would be great for them to talk to you. I set up a Zoom call with that person and I talk to them. We connect over Signal. We have a little Google Drive that we're using to kind of share documents and stuff. That's literally all the thing is. There's no legal entity involved. It's just a bunch of people who are kind of talking over Signal, talking over Zoom. Actually, we've recently moved over to Discord, so we're hanging out on Discord. So I've had a lot of excitement from people who are very happy to have some people with serious academic credentials who work on serious scholarly research in a whole variety of disciplines, to be able to talk to them about these issues. All of us have had the experience of feeling very lonely, feeling very alienated from people in our departments, at our universities, or our places of work, right? And so one thing that's been very easy is to get people to talk about their selves, what their experience, what their interests are, what their hunches are, what their skepticisms are. And part of the culture of the group is that, you know, we're trying to be massively, radically open-minded, including to skeptical perspectives, right? Like it's okay for anybody to be anywhere, right? Like you can believe the wildest off-the-wall stuff that the normal people on the street would think was totally bonkers, or you can believe that, you know, we know very little. It's essentially, you know, there's something going on, but no one knows what it is. So we've got people all over the spectrum there. And so really what we're trying to do is nurture this culture of conversation among serious scholars, And that part has been very successful. And then as we talk about this idea of becoming more visible, like outing ourselves as people who care about this, mixed reactions, and everyone's scared, right? Even the people who are up there now, every one of those people who are there, we've had careful, cautious conversations. What does it mean for you to be public about this? What does it mean for, are you worried? What are you worried about? What kind of messaging would you feel comfortable with being associated with? What kind of messaging would you not feel comfortable being associated with? So that's it's been really good. I consider a lot of these people very close friends now. But the challenge of being visible it's still dangerous. And I myself have had people internal to my department talking to my chair about, in concern that I've been talking about these things publicly. And, I'm not too worried about this. I think it's obvious upon analysis that these are worthy of academic inquiry. And I'm, doing my best to be responsible in how I do that. But yeah, all of us are a little scared, right? Because of this, the stigma that exists. It's essentially, there is an orthodoxy in play, which comes with its own dogma, and we are all heretics.
So you're getting folks involved now, but for you to have that kind of journey you've gone on to be as involved as you're becoming, and I think we had this conversation last time, it was great to see you getting more and more involved and enjoying the speculation, the various aspects of the topic. You could see you were reaching out to these. Who have you spoken to around the topic? And like you say, working with the New Paradigm Institute, I'm guessing Danny Sheehan would be one. And is there anyone else? What's Danny said to you, but what have others said to you about, being involved?
So I've spoken in particular about the Visible College and kind of what we're trying to do. So I've definitely spoken to Danny Sheehan several times, Jim Garrison at the New Paradigm Institute. I've spoken to Gary Nolan and Peter Skafish at Soul Foundation. I've spoken to Rhett Lester at UAP Caucus, and Yuan at UAP Disclosure Fund, and Priestland at Unhidden. And I don't want to leave anybody out, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I didn't make a list. I should have made a list. And in fact, one of the things, okay, so the thing that's up right now, the website that's up at thevisiblecollege.org, like I pushed that this morning. It's being updated now by other members of the team. It will continue to be updated over weeks and months as we have more to share. But one of the resources that we want to put together is a list of the organizations that are out there working on this stuff. Because another thing that's part of being visible, most people don't know that there's so much going on. Organized efforts led by really serious people. So one of the things we want to do is collect that. But yeah, I've been trying to talk to as many people as I can, and anybody out there in the sphere who wants to talk to me, reach out. I am interested in networking us all together. I think, and I've said this many times to the Visible College folk, I suspect that none of the products that we're working on, website, videos, articles, white papers, things like that, I suspect that none of those are going to be as important as just the community of people who know where they are and what to talk to and who we can ask questions about. As this becomes clearer and clearer to the public, it will be very important for there to be those of us who are a little further ahead in the timeline, a little more up to speed on how to think about these things, to be available as resources to them in some form or another. There's a really massive scaling problem that we are, in my view, very soon about to hit, where a lot of people find out very quickly that this is serious. They'll go through ontological shock essentially all at once. And I think Priestland and Unhidden are doing really good work on this, trying to kind of think about ways that we can support direct experiencers, but also people going through ontological shock. And this is another thing that's very close to our heart as far as what the mission of the Visible College is.
What's the best kind of advice you're getting? I won't ask you to reveal private conversations with that kind of list you've spoken about, but what sort of advice are you getting from these folks?
Well, so one thing that's helpful, I mean, so it depends on what you're talking about, right? So let's distinguish between direct experiencers and people who are kind of indirectly going through ontological shock. So I do not consider myself a direct experiencer. I have never seen a UAP. I've never had an encounter with an NHI. But I know people who have, right? Like I know some of them fairly well now, right? And some of their experiences are shocking, really dramatic, right? So among those people, there are specific counselors who I could connect them, or who we could connect them to. There is some work that's done. There's a book by Sean McNamara. Hold on a second. Let me just quickly pull this up because I want to pitch Sean's book because it's good. But Sean did a study on, I think he had about 600 people where he was interviewing them about how they might react to encountering various hypothetical scenarios. He has also, talked to quite a few people. It's called Coping with UFOs. Coping with UFOs, UAP, in the News and in Real Life, a public self-care guide with insights from the Future Planet Survey. Yeah, this guy's name is Sean McNamara. You can pick that up on Amazon.com. Yeah, so that's a nice resource of some things that are going on there. But one of the things that we're puzzled about right now is how to support this. Getting experiencers in touch with other experiences is helpful. Letting them know that there are other experiencers is helpful. Yeah, as far as the general public goes, what we're trying to do, at least, is what we're calling the on-ramp project. Right now, there's this page on our website that just says background. That's our kind of first attempt at doing something with regard to the on-ramp. Like, okay, I guess I need to take this seriously. What do I need to read? What kind of things do I need to know about? That's helpful. So yeah, I know that Unhidden is doing more direct work on this, as far as like coming up with protocols for like discussion forums and support groups and things like that. But yeah, for the time being, most of what we are working on is just trying to understand what ontological shock looks like for different kinds of people. And in particular, one of the questions that we're interested in is what the on-ramp is for each person. Like, how did you come to it? And how is that impacting? But I mean, honestly, the answer right now is we don't have a lot of data, right? There is some data. There's a couple of psychologists on the YouTube channel that I have made public just this morning that you can look at, that talk about some research that's already been done, some work that's already been done specifically with experiencers. Look at them. I'm not that person.
I think you've just answered what my next question was going to be. What I was asking you there, Stephen, was, of all those people you've spoken to, what advice are you getting from Danny Sheehan, Gary Nolan, Peter Skefish? What are these folks saying to you? You're taking on a task here. You're taking on more public image, if you want to call it that. You're putting yourself out there into a pretty unforgiving, you've seen already, UFO community. It's pretty splintered as it can be. So what are they saying to you about getting involved and how to go about things that you don't drive yourself crazy?
Well, that list of people you just gave is a really radically different spectrum of personalities, right?
Huge. Yeah.
And I mean, this is part of the challenge of what we have to navigate right now, right? So like, let's take the difference between somebody like Danny Sheehan and somebody like Peter Skefish, right? So Danny's the kind of guy who's been talking to experiencers and whistleblowers essentially his whole adult life, right? So Danny will say things that sound really crazy if you haven't been paying any attention, right? Like, yeah, I've spoken to multiple people who've stood in a room with human-sized mantis people and telepathically communicated with them, and they materialized out of thin air. And like he just says that like I would say I saw a golden retriever run across the lawn, right? He just says it with this kind of certainty and confidence that baffles people like me personally. Like, I mean, okay, like that's a really big claim, and like, what's your evidence for that claim, and like, can you back that up, and you know, and a lot of times the answer is, can you back that up? No. And the answer, and why you can't back it up, is because that person doesn't want to be known, right? For obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
And so it gets very tricky. So there's kind of the Danny Sheehan approach, which is sort of a fire hose. Like, here's everything I've heard that I think is probably true, right? As opposed to somebody like Peter Skafish, who's very, very cautious, very careful, right? In what he's willing to endorse, and you know, he's always going to give the paper trail on, like, you know, here's why I think it, and here's how, you know, how I checked that, and you know, so there's going to be this whole spectrum of people like Peter Skafish all the way up to Peter like Danny Sheehan, and I'm personally somewhere in the middle. And in my conversation with Peter, you know, he was surprised that I was out talking with as little time under my belt as I have, right? He was kind of warning me, like, Steve, like, it takes 5 years to understand anything basic about what's going on, and I've been working on this for 20 years, and I don't, or 20 plus years, and I don't understand all of it. Like, what do you think you're doing? And I basically said to him, okay, well, this is all I'm doing is trying to recognize that there are already a lot of people like me, and there are about to be a lot more of us who are serious scholarly people who are trying to get up to speed very quickly, because you know, Peter was saying, when disclosure happens, most people are just going to go, oh, I guess there's aliens. And I was like, but that's not what the academics are going to do, right? Like what the academics are going to do is they're going to freak out, right? And they're going to realize, because all of us have spent a lot of time studying our domains, and like, we feel pretty comfortable that we know what's going on, and we kind of know what the other domains are, and why I'm not particularly interested in them, right? And so for there to be a blind spot this big that we've missed, that generates this massive sense of FOMO, right? Like what do I not know? And how might that impact what I care about? And so for people in the academic sphere in particular, there's this sense of like urgency to go find out everything you can and try to devour it. And like, you know, you've got that stack of books behind you. My stack of UFO books is at my house. It's not in my office because I'm actually reading them. But like, that's overwhelming. And so, you know, the way I kind of got Peter Skafish to see that what I was working on was important was for him to kind of, you know, for me to convince him, hey, there needs to be an on-ramp. Like we have to help people who are getting from nowhere to up to speed as fast as possible. And that's the kind of thing that I think doesn't really exist right now. So like, Soul Foundation is amazing. I love Soul Foundation. I'm looking forward to, you know, their second conference. Everything that came out of their first conference was brilliant. But Soul Foundation, rightly, correctly, for what their mission is it has a very high bar, right? Like,
yeah,
we're not going to invite you here unless you're kind of the best of the best, and you've proven yourself over substantial periods of time to have something really substantive to say. And that's great. It's really great. I need to change my tone of voice. That's great. I am super glad that Soul Foundation exists, right? Mm-hmm. And there are dozens, hundreds, about to be thousands, about to be tens of thousands, about to be hundreds of thousands of people who need to get from I wasn't paying any attention to at all to as up to speed as possible very quickly. And what I'm trying to do together with my crew is resource that transition.
And that makes sense. Like you say, Soul Foundation, I don't want to say it's not an exclusive club, but like you say, it's not an on-ramp. It's not for a beginner. It's not like I come along to this and hear about UFOs 101. You've got very high-ranking military personnel, academia, scientists, thinkers who are going there to discuss what a lot of them know bits of, and they're sharing ideas and they're networking. So it's not for your walk-ins, you know, going, right, okay, I'm interested now. Not yet anyway, but like you say, it's early days even for Saul. In terms of the UFO conversation for you, you talk about ontological shock in that short space of time. what's been, I suppose, the most shocking aspect of the conversation for you to get your head around, to get to grips with?
So as you know well, everybody kind of starts with flying saucers and aliens coming from another planet. These are probably spaceships and things that evolved somewhere else. Everybody kind of starts there and then starts finding out that it's much weirder than that, right? And you know, I picked this up early. Everybody was telling me this, and in particular, they rightly call attention to the work of Jacques Vallée. I think Jacques, especially the two books, The Passport to Magonia and The Invisible College, are the kind of nicest introductions to that. Diana Pasulka is, of course, also doing good work here. You know, people who are calling attention. So for me, it's all about the religious space, right? Like my background is in philosophy of religion. You know, I've studied theology, particular Christian theology. But now these days I'm kind of more invested in understanding Buddhism and Hinduism, and you know that's kind of the space that I live in. And so very early on, like I realized, well, gosh, if these things are here and they've been here since the 40s, then I bet they've been here longer than that. And sure enough, right, like, you know, so for my background is all in Christianity, like read the Bible with this kind of lens of unusual phenomena that show up in the sky, unusual beings that appear to people. It's just all over the Bible, right?
Yeah.
And of course, it's all over the other sacred texts of other traditions too, right? And so for me, that's been my biggest question: is what are the kind of theological worldview kinds of implications of this? And I suspect more and more that the answer is really, really significant. So to briefly answer your question, and then I'd be happy to give a much longer answer. When Jacques Vallée convinced me in the book Passport to Magonia that there is a very strong correlation between UFO, alien, UAP, NHI encounters and what we see in the fairy lore, that freaked me out. Right? So, okay, I can't just explain Roswell and Area 51 and all of that. I also have to explain the series of airship waves that happened in the United States. I have to explain this strange floating kind of ceramic thing that was encountered in Japan. I have to explain fairies. Oh wow, this is really big. And my favorite. We did the thing at Yale. I don't know. Do you want to talk about the thing at Yale before I talk about
I think
what
it's
happened at Yale?
it's a nice segue in, yeah.
Yeah. This idea in particular came from Jim Garrison at New Paradigm Institute of running a teach-in event, right? And so Jim is a wonderful social activist who's been working in the peace space his whole life, so back in the Vietnam era, there were these teach-ins, right, or on campuses. Students would gather together with various activists and supportive faculty, and they would try to raise awareness and kind of provide resources to people to know what was going on and what they could do about it and mobilize. So it's like teaching with the point of mobilization, specifically on college campuses. And so he wanted to do this as part of the Citizens for Disclosure thing. And obviously, because visible college folk, most of us are in academia in one form or another, it made sense for us to work together on that. So Yale has a student UFO society, and the head of that, whose name is Sydney, we talked to her about running an event there, and she basically put it together. It was essentially like a conference. There were like 5 sessions that we ran at Yale, and it was interesting. The kind of interest level was strong at the beginning and tapered off through the day, right? We had very good attendance at the first session, maybe 150 people or so there. And then by the time it was at the end, it was essentially just the people running the event hanging out with each other, right? But it was also during like a parents, like a family weekend, and so right, there's some logistical lessons to learn here about how to approach a task like this. But I'm very happy with it. In particular, the talk that we had the most attendance at was Kevin Knuth's talk on the physics of UAP. He also did a really lovely job summarizing some really compelling cases that are that you can't easily dismiss as whatever, misunderstood weather balloons or swamp gas or whatever, right? But for me, it was some of the other conversations. The conversations person to person, of course, are always wonderful at academic conferences. That's a lot of reasons why people do this is, we get up and present papers and give talks and things, but it's really what happens over lunch and over dinner that matters, right? So like, getting to ask Kevin questions about some of the physics and, what kind of data he has access to and how he's analyzing it. That was stuff I got to talk to him about, which was really cool. But for me, it was this guy, Michael Glosson, who's a philosopher of religion, philosopher of science. He gave a talk at the end. It was the last talk, so it was the least well-attended talk, but in my view, personally, the most important talk. And so I'm glad we have it on YouTube now. You can go watch Michael Glosson's talk. But he was warning us against this kind of over focus on flying saucers, right? Because the range of the anomalous is very broad, right? And especially like a phrase like UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Okay, well, like, could you have a more vague term, right? Like there are tons of unidentified anomalous phenomena, right? Yeah. And not all of them are anything like flying saucers, right? Like if someone sees a ghost, that would be an unidentified anomalous phenomena, right? Yeah. So he wasn't talking specifically about anything other. He didn't give any specifics other than this, but like the range of the anomalous is broad, and there's this danger that we have right now of thinking, well, flying saucers are kind of like spaceships. I kind of understand what a spaceship is, and so I can approach that and I can make some sense of it, right? But as you know, and as I'm sure your viewers or your listeners, your audience knows, it doesn't stay tame like that, right? So once you start paying attention to flying saucers, it turns out that there's remote viewers, right? And Lou Elizondo, who just published this book, Imminent, which is great, and you should read it. And I'm still trying to find time to finish it. But he's doing all these podcast interviews and stuff, right? He was a remote viewer, right? And he's worked with remote viewers. And okay, is that real? And then you go and you look and you're like, geez, it is. Like one of the people, actually, he's public on the website, so I can talk about him. Justin Suey, he's at the University of Pittsburgh. Just finished his PhD/MD. I don't know how that works, but he's doing a PhD and an MD. And he's very interested in these kind of parapsychology studies. And he's been shocked as he went to look in at how many there are, how repeatable they are, how good the data is. It's very surprising. Michael Glosson, when I was, hanging out with him afterwards, he mentioned the reincarnation studies that are being done at University of Virginia in the Division of Perceptual Studies, DOPS. And the thing he hooked me with is these what are called xenoglossy cases, where there are children who are born, and when they reach about, there's a window from like 2 to 7 when children claim to have past life memories, but they don't only have past life memories, they have past life skills. So xenoglossy is when these children have the capacity to speak a language that they have never learned. And I was like, what is that about? Right. So I fell down that rabbit hole and I started looking into in particular, those reincarnation studies, and they are shocking. If you don't know about these, Otherworld, the podcast just did an interview about this a few weeks ago. There's also a documentary by Leslie Kane, one of the big UFO journalists who worked on the New York Times article. One of her interests is the kind of life after death
Mm.
world. And so she has this book called Surviving Death, but there's also a Netflix series called Surviving Death.
It's very good. Yeah.
That last episode, when you're watching that kid like pick out pictures of all the family members and house and park of a person who they remember being in a previous life, like it will shake you up real good. And so like I went and I bought Ian Stevenson's book called Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect. And right, like when you start finding out things, like there are like physical deformations that that show up on children's bodies that correlate with memories from a previous life injury that seems to have impacted their physical form today, right? Like there's like arms that have like rope marks on them because they remember in a previous life being tied up. Like it's so crazy. So like this has really got me like all the way down the road of the anomalous, right? Like, okay, wait a minute. So if we have to take things like reincarnation seriously, and we have data for it, and the data is compelling, and there's thousands of cases. This is not like an edge case thing, right? Like there are so many cases that DOPS has studied that they can identify specific trends, right? Like you'll likely remember this if you were murdered, but you might not remember this if you only died of natural causes, right? Like I think it's something on the Otherworld podcast that they said something like 70% of the cases they have are solved, which means they get enough detail out of the children to go look back and identify a single person historically who they seem to be remembering. Okay, all right. So I guess we have good data for reincarnation. I guess we have good data for remote viewing. And so now come back to the UFOs, right? And be like, what are these things, right? And all of a sudden, the ideas that people like David Grush are talking about in the House Oversight hearing about higher dimensional beings, kind of projecting images into lower dimensions of some in some way, or interacting with matter in a way that's different than the way we interact with it. Those all seem really salient, right? And so it becomes very difficult to kind of sit with the degree of anomaly and think, I bet our whole paradigm is wrong. Like we went wrong someplace pretty badly. I don't know when exactly, right? I mean, I kind of have my suspicions that it was the sort of Newtonian, mechanistic, materialistic kind of assumptions that we kind of locked into place as that was the rational thing to believe, and that's what drives science, and right, all of that. And we kind of should have learned that wasn't what was going on when quantum mechanics hit in the early 20th century, and we start realizing, oh, it looks like determinism is straightforwardly and provably false. It looks like the mind does have some impact on the world. Like that should have been setting off some red flags. And for me now, it's just all red flags everywhere. Like, oh dear, like, no, the world is not only material. And for somebody like me, that is okay. Like, because I live in the philosophy of religion space, and right, like this is stuff that Hindu folk, Buddhist folk have been saying forever. And I guess indigenous folk, very importantly, indigenous folk have been saying forever. And yeah, wow. Okay. Like it's not just flying saucers. It's bigger than that. It might be way bigger than that. It might go all the way to the foundation of our whole understanding of reality. And, this is just the doorway, right? Like the UFOs are just kind of the first issue that we can approach because they look like spaceships. And so we kind of start thinking about that. But as we walk further and further down that road, it seems that the lesson is our whole worldview is wrong.
So you're taking a snapshot of that conversation into that Yale teaching, and just to talk on it, you had it had a double title, your presentation, didn't it? Method in the Madness, Benevolent Non-Interference and the Alien Agenda, or it was The Prime Directive and the Problem of Evil, which was a shout out to your Star Trek geeks in that one.
Yes, yeah, and I mean now the YouTube video currently has the title, I think, Alien Agendas, the problem, the Prime Directive, or the Problem of Evil. I hybridized them into one title. But yeah, What do you want to talk about? I know you've watched it, so.
So there's some of the basics in there, you know, letting them know UAP means UFO, aliens NHI. So you're getting folks used to the terminology. It's okay to believe in this stuff, and you touch on some important cases. You show some early photographs and what you consider, you know, this is good evidence. This is strong stuff. But I love those discussions, and I suppose, like you say, it fits into your place around philosophy that what if they're, and you show some scales, and I'm going to put it in a layman's term, feel free to correct me and give it given the correct terminology, but you know, what if they're good, what if they're bad, what if they're indifferent, what if they care, what if they don't care, what if they're indifferent? And is it safe to say that looking at that presentation and what we're discussing, the only rational explanation is that it's multiple different species or multiple different phenomena all interacting together, because it doesn't seem that we're just getting it all funneling into one?
I think so. Once you actually digest the full data set as best you can, it seems pretty clear that there, to me at least, and this, I mean, this is the argument that I make, right? That it seems like there's more than one agenda, more than one type of being. So there really could be, and I suspect there probably are, straightforward extraterrestrial biological beings, right, in spaceships. Like that's probably correct.
And it's also the boring stuff now when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the mundane. Oh,
yeah, that's the mundane, right?
Planet. Okay, yeah.
Right. And then you have to start asking these other kinds of questions about what else might there be. I've personally become very interested in the concept of the concept of identity and how it relates to what I call mental transparency, or some people call telepathy. So it seems that we can at least imagine that there are beings who have direct access to each other's minds, right? And this is not, I mean, one of the reasons we can talk about this so clearly right now, or so openly right now, is because we know that this is possible. Elon Musk has this company, Neuralink. They're building chips. They're putting them in people's brains, right? Not the only company doing that. There's other companies doing this, right? Like there are research projects that have shown you can think a word and it will type on a screen, right? And we're also working on interfaces into the brain, right? So we can help deaf people hear by hooking into their auditory complex. We can help blind people see by hooking into their visual cortex and feeding information from cameras and microphones, right? Okay, so that's an out and an in. So now just imagine, like, this is only a technological problem now, that I have a really robust Neuralink embedded all the way through my skull, encountering every aspect, embedded in every aspect of my brain, and you do the same thing. And then I could just have an app on my phone that's like, hey, I want to share my memories from childhood with you. And then I just like push the slider, and now you can see them, like you can remember them in the way that I could, right? Like, this is a technological problem. And just slide that all the way up. And if you slide that all the way up, now you have a mind that exists that's the interface of what was two separate minds, right? And then just aggregate that. Like, what would that being be, right? It would be a hive mind. It would have agendas that were radically different than any one of us could have. You would view an individual body kind of like we view cells, right? And like, could we be dealing with something like that? That's this, and then throw in the reincarnation stuff, right? Like, apparently there are souls which survive the death of a body and are born into another body, or something like that. Minimally, there's these memories and character traits and physical traits that are transferring from one body to another by mechanisms unknown, right? So there seemed to be this kind of non-material reality that's governing that. Well, okay, if there's a non-material reality associated with just this one thing, what if we like all network ourselves? Like, might there be really highly intelligent, super active, like macro beings that are made up of things like us? And is that what we're dealing with? Like is one of the reasons why this stuff is so strange that we're dealing with, it's sort of like a cell trying to understand what a body is doing. Like that would be that's a live option for me, right?
It starts to even like when you mention like the mind stuff. So this is where I can go off, forget my notes, right? I just start to think computing. And you mentioned even like having the phone and you slide the memories up. Well, surely an advanced species, forget the phone and you don't even have the link anymore, the hardware, because that's what we're doing with technology, as the hardware starts to disappear and you don't need as much technology or as like that. And then you start to say about, you know, a hive mind and then what's a soul. And it's like, it just all starts to say, or how memories transfer. Well, memory transfers from my PC to my MacBook via hard drive or a USB pen.
Yep.
So then take that away, cloud storage. So then is it just some advanced cloud storage and then you don't, where is the server? Okay, you don't need a server anymore because everything's the server, the universe is the server, this is all the link.
Yeah.
And it just goes up that level. You know, like when you see like an iris and an eye and it looks like a galaxy or a nebula.
Yeah.
And you're just like, are these things just one after another after another? You know, I think it's turtles all the way down is the classic phrase. But that's the way I start to think of it, that at least it makes sense that we have examples now technologically that you could look at these and say, maybe that's just something else.
Yeah.
And that for me is really interesting. And then you start to get into the argument or debate around, if we have a soul, do these other beings have souls? And people like Tom DeLonge have discussed often, and others have as well. Tom DeLonge's the modern example, that some of these beings or entities don't like us as a species because we have souls and because we have free will, which is something they don't have. So we are, and it's a very human way to look at this, which I hate, but we are unique. And it is that, it's a bias, isn't it? Oh, we're humans, we're special. We've got this special planet and special bodies and special souls. But maybe the soul thing is unique in some way, shape, or form. And these really advanced beings, I kind of buy into some of these things like us, some of them don't care. And that makes sense to me. And that explains at least the pockets of abductees that have good experiences, abductees that have bad experiences, why some of these things seem to question you during abductions. Why are you screaming? Why are you shouting? We're not going to hurt you. But they are hurting people. And they're like, there you go, it's fine. And they do something medically to them. And the pain's gone. There just seems to be so many different varying themes that can be hard. If you were going into a Yale teaching and you had an hour and you start saying what we've just said in the last 5 minutes, I guarantee the room's pretty much empty by the end of it, unless there's some people selling some really good weed around campus that day, because it just starts getting really wild very quickly.
Yeah. No, and this is the problem. Like, this is the big problem, right? Like, except for a moment, my assumption that the whole paradigm we're working with in kind of a modern scientific mindset, and I want to say, you know, specifically like a modern Western scientific mindset, because science doesn't have to be like this, right? As evidenced by DOPS, for instance, right? Like, science is gathering data, constructing hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, right? Like, science can do all kinds of things that don't make these kind of, you know, materialist assumptions, right? So science is not equivalent to materialism. Science we need, looks like we probably need to discard materialism, right? I wanted to say, so there's this big gap in like, even talking about it is just crazy, because, you know, anybody that's remotely up to speed realizes, oh geez, the whole paradigm's wrong. But if you're talking to people who are still kind of in the orthodoxy, like they haven't embraced what the heresy yet, then you sound crazy. And you know, we're seeing the same reactions that we see historically with orthodoxies and heresies, right? Like, orthodoxies oppress heresies. We have these social structures very low embedded in our psyche. It's not like you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist about this. Like, it's just cognitive bias. It's just confirmation bias, right? Like, we feel uncomfortable with things that are outside the normal, and so we shut them down, right? So yeah, and it's really interesting to me, like, you know, you always have great questions. You're always seeing the next thing, right? But like, this idea, oh, is this sort of like a computer? Is this sort of like a simulation? You know, even people like Elon Musk and you know, Nick Bostrom and people who are talking about those are two different classes of human, by the way. Elon Musk, we all know who Elon Musk is. Nick Bostrom, very important, very thoughtful, critically thinking philosopher. I don't want to put them in the same sentence without like. But anyways, Bostrom has done all this work on simulation hypotheses, and he's one of the people who kind of pushes this argument that we're probably in a simulation, right? And I think this is very strange. Like computers, like what we think of as computers, these circuit things that we have, are like we've only recently come up with them. They won't exist for much longer anyways. We're going to switch to quantum computing pretty soon. Why not incorporate them biologically somehow? Like, I don't know. I find it very unlikely that there are hardware circuits like we have that we're running inside of, right? And I want to call our attention back to, wait a minute, hold on, come on. Hinduism has been saying this for thousands of years, that the kind of, there is an interconnectedness between all things, that consciousness, mind is primary, right? The Atman is the core self, the big S self that underlies everything. And then there's a whole variety of ways that Hinduism fleshes that out, and how it relates to beings like us, or perceptions like ours, and what that means about spirituality. And like I don't want to allow people to keep this in the comfortable, oh, it's like a computer, oh, it's like a spaceship. Like that's a good place to start. Yeah, it's like a computer. Yeah, it's like a spaceship. It's also like Atman. It's also like Brahman. It's also like the Dharmakaya. It's also like, right, like you're not right. These powers that we seem to have some capacity to do, communicate, mind to mind. The Ganzfeld experiments have shown that you can we're bad at this, but we can project mental images to someone in another space, and then they can, better than chance, pick out what they think you're sending them. Remote viewing, we seem to be able to know where someone is and draw pictures of it. Again, better than chance. Yeah. Not a whole lot better than chance. We're not very good at it, but it's a measurable effect that's been measured many times.
Some people have been good at it.
Some people apparently have been very good at it, but the Indic traditions, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, they have said this forever, right? These are called the siddhis, right? These powers that you can get as you meditate and kind of approach enlightenment, like literally the same powers of like telepathy and seeing things that are elsewhere, and like, geez, I really suspect that what happened is this, right? Like modern science kind of developed in a context where there was essentially Christianity and friends, and then kind of materialist atheism and friends. And the whole battle in modern philosophy of religion and worldview, and like the whole worldview space has been a battle between those two schools, right? And then there's the Indic schools, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, that we've just ignored. And this is not hypothetical. Go to India and say, did you know that there are kids who remember things from apparently previous lives? And they'll be like, what are you talking about? Of course we know that. Let me introduce you to my friend down the road who remembers being this person, right? Like, did you know that there are physical deformations that track past life events? Yeah, of course we knew that. How did you not know that? Like, have you not been listening to us for the past several thousand years? And the answer seems to be, yeah, we just haven't been listening. We haven't been listening to the Indic people. We haven't been listening to indigenous people across the world, all of whom have been saying there are sky people from sky nations who encounter us, and some of them are scary, and some of them are kind, and some of them are helping, and some of them seem to be exploiting. None of this is new. It's only new if you're in this kind of Western battle between certain ways of understanding religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam are all very similar in these regards, versus this kind of modern materialist, atheist, determinist kind of way of thinking about things. It turns out, it seems, that the determinism, materialism stuff is just false. And that I don't want to say Christianity is false, but certainly we are going to need to revisit some of these things and ask whether we might have misinterpreted a lot of them.
see from a layman's point of view, and excuse my complete ignorance on this, okay?
Mm.
I'm not religious.
Yeah.
I see a lot of problems in general with religion from an uneducated point of view, but I just have to turn on the TV and go, wow, look at all those folks arguing over essentially the same thing.
Mhm.
If you've seen the South Park episode about science, the
I don't.
author,
I haven't. But tell me what I need to know.
so basically the world evolves to a place in the future where the new religion is science,
Mhm.
and people believe in different types of science. There's
Mhm.
like, I can't remember, there's two human versions of it, and otters have also evolved to be scientific, and they are fighting between the three of each other, and they all believe the same thing basically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
instead of saying "oh my god," you say "oh my science," right? South Park should be shown in schools. I will preach this till the day I die, that South Park should be shown in schools. Okay,
I love
but
it.
yeah, you have to go and watch that for me, Stephen. Okay.
Okay.
But from
Send me a link.
from my uneducated point of view, all religions are different interpretations of very similar themes and ideas
Mhm.
that are telling the same thing, like you have literally just said there. So that's the way I've always looked at religion, as
Yeah.
a rough way to look at X, Y, and Z, and they're all selling the same kind of stuff.
So I'm going to push back on this a little bit. You're on my home turf now. So there is certainly a sense in which you can take every religious tradition, every major long-lasting religious tradition that actually has a lot of adherents, right? And especially, like, I don't care about religious traditions that haven't survived at least a generation, and right, generated new followers. But ideally, hundreds or thousands of years worth of that is what I care about mostly. You can kind of average over those. We'll just call these the great traditions. Pick your kind of Abrahamic traditions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Indic traditions, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism. Those kinds, and then the long-lasting indigenous traditions we need, of which there are thousands, right? So it's difficult to kind of average over those, but kind of stick all that together and squint and look at it and say, are they all saying basically the same thing? And there are definitely very clear trends, right? Like, yes, there are minimally in the kind of moral space, like, let's be not selfish, let's not be overly concerned with kind of mere bodily pleasures, but can be concerned about care and compassion and mindfulness, meditation, prayer, spirituality. Like, we can, when we average over, we can see there's this kind of lots of common threads, but I don't let my students say oh, they're all just saying the same thing, because no, they're really not. The differences do matter, and they certainly matter to the people in those communities, right? Like, if you say all the religions are the same, what you have a danger of doing if you do that is you are just creating a new perspective that none of them share and looking down on all of them, right? Like, I am the enlightened Westerner who understands that all religions are basically just the same, and I know better than to be worried about any of the details, right? And then the pushback from actual religious folk is going to be, what are you doing? Like, do you understand this aspect and this and this detail, and why we think this is important and why we think that's not important? And so what I really love is robust cross worldview dialogue. And there's two examples that there's several examples that I'm very fond of, but in particular, there was this Catholic monk named Thomas Merton, who he was friends with quite a few cool people. He was friends with the Dalai Lama. He was friends with Thich Nhat Hanh. But in particular, the relationship between Thich Nhat Hanh and Thomas Merton, I love, because Thomas Merton, until his death, unfortunately, an untimely death and relatively young, was a serious Catholic and never left his Catholic tradition, right? And Thich Nhat Hanh was a serious Zen Buddhist and never left his tradition. And internal to their traditions, they were like, we don't agree. And those disagreements do matter. We're not going to give up on them, but we also see and value each other, and let's talk, right? And that's the kind of engagement that I love, where you see people who kind of stick into their tradition, because the traditions have depth to them that the average, let's just be nice to eat. Like, okay, what do we learn from all of them? Be nice. Don't be selfish. Okay, but like how? And what does that look like? And what should I read? And what should I do? What kind of practices are fruitful? And so when you really try to do those things, it becomes important to kind of go back down in detail and get into the weeds again, right? And so while I think it's true that there's certainly this kind of overarching general idea that's similar between all the religions, the details matter. And I suspect right now the details matter a lot. So like, okay, you know, my background, my life, most of my community is in the Christian space, right? And so it's like, well, I better, like, what are all those UAP that show up in the Gospels, for instance, right?
Mhm.
Like there's a thing that glows in the sky and moves, and then the wise men, the magi, follow it from wherever they were to Bethlehem, and that's how they find Jesus. And when Jesus is born, there are a whole host of things that come to the sky, to the shepherds, and announce it. And like, oh, geez, what is all this? And then you go and you look at Jacques Vallée, and in the Invisible College, towards the end, he talks about the Marian apparitions, right? Like the Fatima and those events where there's these like weird things that are happening in the sky that are seen by thousands of people simultaneously, right? And you know, and then it's like, okay, actually, I bet the details matter. I bet, I mean, for heaven's sake, Jesus himself, right? Like the story of Jesus in the Gospels is in, you know, his youth we don't know very much about. At the very beginning of his public ministry, he hangs out with John the Baptist. He baptizes him in the River Jordan. Something comes from the sky and says, "This is my son," right? And then Jesus leaves and goes into the wilderness, and he is taken up into the sky by a tempter being who offers him apparently rule over the planet. And Jesus says no, and then comes back down and then starts casting out demons and stuff, right? It's like, oh my God, like, what was that? What happened? Who abducted him? What were they telling him? What did he object to? Why did he object to it? Like, what is going on? Right? And so for me, the interest right now is all in the details, right? Like, and not only in the Christian world, although I suspect the Christian story is extremely important, right? But it can't be the only important story, because there are similar related stories all over the world, and it's going to be important for us to explore what those might mean and actually take them seriously at face value, which I must admit I have never personally done since I was a young child, right? Like when I got into being theologically sophisticated, philosophically sophisticated, I did what most philosophers of religion do, which is you kind of take a very philosopher's God kind of God, right? Like Plato and Aristotle get hybridized into Aquinas, and then that's basically what we think about, right? This kind of big G God, ultimate thing. And then I guess Jesus is cool, and, you know, miraculous stuff happened with Jesus, right? Like, so most people who do academic theology, academic philosophy, like that's what they're doing. And if you have an interest in things like angels and demons and seraphim and cherubim and thrones and principalities, and like that's weird and fringy, right? Like you better not talk about those too much, right? If you have an interest in things like the witch that summons the spirit of Samuel in the Old Testament, right? You're weird if you're interested in that stuff, right? And at this point, I'm like, all I care about is the weird stuff. Like, what's going on? The paradigm is broken. The edge cases are all that matter. The anomalies are what matter. Pay attention to the anomalies everywhere.
You've managed to bring that back several times really well to UFOs. So, in amongst scolding me for my South Park education on religion,
That's all right. But it was a gentle, a loving scolding.
It's absolutely fine. And the beauty of philosophy, I'm sure, is knowing that you're wrong, but going down that route anyway.
We're always wrong. It's fine.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'm stuck in a matrix, or I don't know what's going on.
Everyone can be wrong, but not everyone can be right. There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe that's different philosophy. I don't know. But no,
No.
like I say, I come from that from an uneducated point of view, with a small likelihood I'm ever going to educate myself to the point where I know enough about all these religions, because I don't honestly care enough about the detail and all this kind of stuff. So I suppose from a UFO point of view, that's about as religious as I get.
Yeah.
But like you quite rightly say, there's so much crossover. We should probably do another episode one time just on all that kind of stuff. And I've spoken to individuals.
I have to get that trophy of the like most repeated guest. So keep bringing me back.
Telling you, like, was it Paul Thigpen I had on extraterrestrial intelligence,
Thigpen's
the Catholic
awesome.
Church?
I love his work. He's done a fantastic job.
I've done that at Christmas just gone, which was obviously ideal. So that was a fun Christmas episode.
Absolutely.
Here you go, folks.
Yeah.
But listen, we're going to get to listener questions, Stephen. But I want to ask you one more question first that I put out to listeners to ask them, and they've started sending me them in. I've only read one out so far, and it was pretty interesting, but different way of thinking about it, honestly. If there was a person, you talk about this presidential review board, and you're right, it's probably missing a psychologist, and all these folks need to represent the different socio-economical, whatever it may be, aspects of society to come together and work out how to disclose and what to disclose, essentially. If humanity had to pick one representative to go up and be part of, I don't know, something to like that, akin to a galactic federation, we need one of you to come and represent humanity and chat to us about why humans are all right, why you're good guys. It was quite interesting. Of all the people that I picked, a celebrity, I picked Stephen Fry, who's well known here in the UK, comedian, but he's a genius, very funny guy. He's a genius. One of the listeners got in touch and said they would choose an 18-month-old toddler who hadn't yet learned to speak.
Wow.
Because giving them an example of what we can be and a blank slate and all that kind of stuff. Fascinating, terrifying thought as a parent, but fascinating. I was like, fair enough. What do you think would be the best representation of humanity to send forward to some kind of alien presence?
Yeah. So I mentioned a person at to tail into my talk, and that's the same person I'm going to go with here, who's Malala. I don't know how to pronounce her last name very well, but Yousafzai, I think is her name. Right? She's the Pakistani activist. Because she has, well, first of all, she's a person who's very significantly suffered. And I only trust people who have very significantly suffered. So one of my favorite books is this book called The Book of Joy. It's written by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. It's a fantastic book. It's just all about joy and how to live joyfully. And if you just read it without knowing who they are, there's this feeling you have that's like, oh, come on, like stop being so like sweet and Hallmark cardish, right? Like and then you remember like, oh no, these are people who have been like horribly oppressed and whose friends have been murdered, and like, okay, you're allowed to talk about joy. Right. Somebody like Malala is the kind of person who I want to represent humanity, because she's seen the worst of it and she still loves us, and she's very embedded in peacemaking and nonviolent modes of social change, and like that's what we need. Like I am very, very, very worried right now about how the narrative about the anomalous is being controlled by specifically the intelligence community of the United States of America. And if there is a group of people who does not deserve our trust, it is the intelligence community of the United States of America, right? And I am worried about this for lots of reasons, but one of the ones I talk about in my lecture, and that feels very salient to me right now, is this push for this fear narrative, right? These beings exist. They are here. They are powerful in a way that we cannot stop. therefore we are afraid. Even like the whole immaculate constellation stuff that's just been coming out over the last couple of days, right? Schellenberger just did an interview with Colt Hart, which was great. And they talk about this case, right? Where there's this F-22 that's surrounded by like 3 glowing orbs, and they move in a way to obstruct its passage so that it must turn in a direction that they want it to turn. And watch them talk about that, because they're both afraid, and they both talk about how this is a threat and how this is an expression of dominance. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, that was an entirely non-violent way of redirecting a jet from going someplace that presumably they didn't want it to go. Why is that a threat? Like it didn't do anything to it tracked our movements, and when we rotated, it rotated in it. Yeah. And so it's demonstrating that it has the capacity to follow you very, very well.
Dolphins do the same thing.
Yeah. Yes. And did it hurt you? No, it didn't hurt us, right? Like, listen to Ryan Graves talk about this, Americans for Safe Aerospace, right? Like, during the House Oversight hearing, there's this object, and it was like a cube surrounded by a sphere, and it split this F-18 formation, like right next to us, and like this is a flight risk. Is it a flight risk? Have any of them ever run into us? Is there any evidence, if they have run into us, that they ran into us on purpose? Or are they just playing with us? The dolphin example is wonderful. Thank you for this, right? Like, go out on a boat, like, when I was a kid in Southern California, went out to Catalina Island, right? Which is apparently a UFO hotspot, which I didn't know at the time. But, as we're going out, these dolphins are just just following our ship, playing around with us. Like, where's the threat? I'm not seeing a threat. Like, what I'm seeing is a kind of playful, puzzling engagement with us. Now, certainly in the UAP space, right? Like the things that are flying around in the sky, right? Apparently, Elizondo has confirmed that he's seen the video of the missile takedown that's been rumored about for decades, since the 60s, right? Where there was this missile launch and the warhead came off and a flying saucer comes in and blows it up with a light beam, right? Like, is that a threat? No. Do you know how comforting it is to imagine that maybe we couldn't kill each other with our nukes because there might be someone who stopped us? I am so much more afraid of the American national security world of our trigger-happy politicians than I am of the flying saucer that shot down the missile. Thank God there's something to shoot down the missiles. Like, I'm very, very worried that what's about to happen is more disclosure is about to hit, and we're going to split right down the middle. In this space, I'm worried about this fear-mongering that's happening already among my allies, among people like Elizondo and Grush and Graves and Fravor. Like, there are people whose perspectives I trust, who I believe are telling the truth, who are working to get the truth out to the public for good reasons, but they are also simultaneously reinforcing this narrative of fear that I don't think actually fits the data. And I do want to be clear, like, I don't suspect, I'm not on the other direction either. Like, I don't think we're dealing with just like all heavenly angelic beings trying to bring us to enlightenment. Like, it's not all bodhisattvas either, right? I bet it's a whole blend of beings all over the spectrum with radically different types of value systems and psychologies that we can't even imagine. Like, if we're dealing with hive minds, like macro minds, like, oh man, this could be the wackiest, craziest, most difficult cross-cultural, cross-species political situation to negotiate. And right now I'm very worried that the only people who know are our spies, our soldiers, and our politicians. And this is very, very bad.
Yeah, like you say, they've got a military background, so not to agree with it, but you can see why they have that. A threat, it's not a threat. So anything they don't understand or shows military might or prowess over them, I understand at least that would be why they would come to that. And you're right. But you also said in your presentation, which I wholeheartedly agree with, I think you actually mentioned Lou Elizondo and how much you respect him.
Yep.
But you're also going to disagree with him and you do that in your presentation. And like anyone listening to this, I would hope you can listen to me, a guest, or anyone, and disagree, but understand they have a point of view an opinion, and especially when it comes to UFOs, no one knows. And we still aren't in a position where I can say, that's the guy, that's the woman, whoever
Yeah.
is the one to go with, because it could still be something totally different that no one's even came up with yet. There could be,
Yeah.
this is actually, if the answer on a postcard, it might be something no one's thought of yet. And everything we do know, actually, it was far too simplistic, it was far too basic, it was wild speculation, and is all wrong. And actually, it's that answer over there that no one's been talking about for a long, long time.
Exactly. And I just want to be clear, I'm happy to be more political than you are. I don't think any of the political parties are good. I think it's all a mess, blah, 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 blah. But I also want to make sure that I say of not only, the specific people we're talking about, Lou and Dave Fravor and all these characters, David Grush, who have this military back. Like, I have a lot of respect for the military. I'm a military family. My father was military. My grandfather was military. My oldest son is military, right? Like, I almost went into the military. So I'm not against the military. I just want more than the military involved, right? Like, I actually think, I mean, the U.S. intelligence community has done some pretty dark stuff. So I'm more critical of the intelligence world than I am of the military world, honestly. The military folk are more honorable.
I've got plenty of listeners who get in touch and say very similar things about IC community and whatnot. So that's understandable.
Yeah, they're weird and shady, and they do because they're paid to do so, right? They're paid to be deceptive and to find deception and not trust anybody. So, like, I'm less excited that they exist at all, but I'm content to have them in the room, right? But it needs to be a bigger room. There needs to be a lot more representative of all humanity parties who are involved in this, right? Another worry that I have is the degree to which the Americans are concerned about American national security. And it's like, look, I'm a fan of, like, the core principles of the United States. I love the people of the United States. I love the land of the United States. But the institutions of the United States are problematic and might need to be really dramatically changed. And one of the ways that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to our policies and what we're doing is the way in which it impacts the rest of the world, right? So, like, if I'm shooting down a flying saucer to protect American national security, and in so doing am putting all of humanity at risk, that is not defensible.
Quite right. Listen, let's get to the listener questions, Stephen, before we run out of time. Thank you to everyone who sent them in. Some wonderful questions that when I ask Stephen, I'm going to ask him to also explain some of the words that are actually being used so I can understand them.
Great, let's do it.
I'll dress it up that, the listeners might not understand. I do, but you can explain it, Stephen. But it's definitely
yeah, that's great.
So, question from Aaron. He asks, what does Stephen think the biggest implication disclosure will have on society is? Are religious fundamentalists the gatekeepers? So it's kind of two parts there.
So I am worried about some of these rumors that are going around that particularly a certain way of thinking about Christianity has a kind of stronghold internal to the intelligence military community, and that they believe that some of these things, or they believe that perhaps all of these things are demonic and therefore not to be taken, not to be engaged as kind of discussion partners in negotiation, right? Now, that being said, like, I'm worried about that too. I'm worried that there might be these kind of higher dimensional, advanced kinds of other types of beings that have agendas that are pretty dark from our perspective, right? Like, I'm not saying that that's not a worry, but I think it's pretty clear that's not all that's going on. There's more than that's going on. And even if you're in Christian world, like, if there's demons, there's angels, because demons are just angels that are bad ones, right? So then not all of them are bad. So yeah, I suspect that the religious stuff is going to be very, very big. And I suspect that one of the things that when I was talking to Priestland at Unhidden, one of the things that they're trying to do is identify communities who might have the hardest time adjusting. And I actually do think that kind of certain strands of Christianity might be the ones that have the hardest time responding to this, right? Because if it turns out that some of the theological interpretations of who Jesus was aren't exactly right, but he's still he is still who the Gospels describe, but not what the Nicene Creed says, or the Council of Chalcedon says, right? Like if that happened, that would be a very difficult adjustment. If that turned out to be true, that would be a very difficult adjustment for most Christians, to kind of return to the stories themselves and be like, I guess the stories were right, but maybe some of the interpretive stuff was wrong. That's going to be very, very difficult, because there's been a lot of theology done, a lot of wars fought over how to interpret those things. That I think is something that I'm personally pretty concerned about, and that I'm talking to pastors and theologian friends of mine about ways we might have to deal with these ideas that are outside of the current, the kind of, not just the current Christian orthodoxy, but what has been the dominant Christian orthodoxy for like 1600 years. So that might be challenging. What was the other thing? Like, who else am I worried about?
No, so it was religious fundamentalists being gatekeepers, and
Yeah.
what do you think the biggest implication disclosure will have on society?
The implication for disclosure on society, hard to say. Like everything, right? Like if even if it turns out, as we were joking about earlier, that all of this is just a classified anti-gravity program, if that's true, then they have access to an energy technology which they have been hiding for almost 100 years, while we torch the environment using fossil fuels to keep George Bush and friends wealthy because they're oil tycoons. If that's true, that's bad, right? And that will destabilize basically everything. I mean, I believe that there is good reason that this has been kept secret. That's why it's been kept secret. If there were no good reasons to keep it secret, it wouldn't be a secret anymore, right? Like at some degree, it has to be the case that the people who know also know why it's important that the public doesn't know, right? So they must have good reasons to think, if whatever the truth is came out, this would be destabilizing in a way that's very concerning. Like people like Helen McCaw have published this paper with Soul Foundation about financial impacts.
Mm-hmm.
Helen's a good friend of mine now. We talk regularly about concerns that we have with regard to this destabilization of economies, right? Alexander Wendt, who's here at Ohio State and poli-sci, has published on concerns about political sovereignty, right? Like if these things can fly in and out of our controlled airspace and we can't stop them, then we don't have control over our own land, which is a fundamental part of having political stability. So those two reasons alone seem like good reasons to try to keep the secret, or at least let the secret out in a way that's careful and responsible, right? So yeah, religious impacts, political impacts, economic, financial impacts, just psychological impacts, like the cost of just realizing that you have been lied to for 80 years alone is a big deal. And then realizing that that you aren't, when you were talking earlier, like humans, we always want to think of ourselves as the most special thing in the universe. Like, what if we're not? What if we're just like cosmic toddlers, and these are just babysitters who are just kind of keeping an eye on us to try to make sure we don't kill ourselves, right? Like, that would be a real big blow to the human identity, to the human sense of value and purpose. And that would have catastrophic impacts on lots of people. So yeah, it's hard to pick one. There's a lot. It's a big deal. It's the biggest deal.
Little question to move on from what you've just said at the end there, from True Crime Boozer on YouTube. Great name. Evidently some form of prime directive is in place.
Yeah.
Are we simply a genetic farm yield a primate planet tourist site?
I don't know. I doubt that we're only a genetic farm, but I do puzzle about this, right? And again, let's go back to our ancient traditions, our indigenous traditions. Like they've basically all said that the human origin is because of the activity of NHI in some form or another, right? Whether those are spiritual beings or transdimensional beings or extraplanetary beings or whatever. Like we are who we are in part because of intervention from intelligent beings of some kind. I do suspect that there's something to that, and but I don't think. I don't know. We could be pets. I doubt we're food. There's these worries, like rumors going around that like the reptilians eat us, and like I don't know if there are reptilians. I don't know if they eat us. Like maybe, but not a lot of us. Not a lot of the time. Like most people seem to live an intact life from childhood up through adulthood, left basically to their own devices to do what they want to do. This is why I think this prime directive thing is the primary mode of engagement with us. We mostly seem to be left alone. I don't think we need conspiracy theories to explain everything that's going on. Basically, politics looks like it's pretty straightforwardly just humans and normal human psychology unfolding over time. So I don't think, I think we're mostly being left alone. And perhaps, nudged in various ways.
Good answer. Stephen has a question for Stephen.
Hey, other Stephen.
I'll need you to just tell us what these two things exactly mean. I would like to hear him expanding on how the acceptance of the reality of the phenomena could shift the default worldview from physicalism to idealism. Can you just quickly, physicalism to idealism, what those two things mean?
Yeah. Okay. So there's been this, there is this apparent difference between mind and body, right? Between the material and the physical and the mental, right? The material and the mental. And so there's a very long-standing philosophical puzzle in the philosophy of mind, what the mind-body problem. What is the relationship between the mind and the body? Because they seem to be two different types of things, right? And there's basically three views. There's dualism, which is that mind and body are different, but they interact with each other somehow, right? So like there's a soul that embodies a body, but the soul could survive the body, and like, that kind of view is a dualist view. A physicalist view says there's really only the physical stuff, the material stuff, and then there's these puzzles about how to speak about the mental, and right, there's various attempts to try to reduce the mental to the physical. Work done by people like the Churchlands, who are suggesting that the mind just is the brain considered a different way or something like that. Whereas idealism is on the other side, which is to say that the physical is mental, that there isn't a physical separate from the mental. So one of the most famous philosophers here is Berkeley, and he had this phrase: "To be is to be perceived." So in his view, all there is minds. And when I say that, let me try to find an object that I can use to describe here. I'll use my little space shuttle here. Right, here's my, all right. So this is an orange rocket, right? What is that? Well, it is a thing that is orange and cylindrical and whatever, right? And so an idealist says there is no thing. There's just the appearance orange together with the appearance cylinder, together with the appearance adjacent to white cylinder, together with the, right? And all it is perceptions of a mind, and there is no object distinct from the mind. So literally in Berkeley's view, if there were no perception of a thing, it wouldn't exist at all. And then you start wondering, well, gosh, then if we all close our eyes, does the world disappear? Does the world go out of existence?
Yeah.
And his answer is no, because there is a universal observer, God. There is a single over mind, like a mind that perceives all, right? And that's what reality is. So everything in Berkeley's view is minds, and in particular, God's mind. And everything is essentially ideas in the mind of God. And then we also are minds that kind of share in the ideas of the mind of God, right? So that's a view where it's all minds all the way through. And this is not unique to the Western tradition. Actually, this looks like it's kind of the default view of Hinduism, right? The Atman or the Brahman, like the fundamental reality, the core self, is consciousness itself, right? So consciousness is the core of reality, right? Buddhism has a view like this. I'm not remembering the school of Buddhism off the top of my head, but there's this kind of mind-only view in Buddhism also. So all of those are idealisms. Now, will the anomalous lead us to idealism? I don't know. It depends on the details, right? And I just I don't know. I could imagine. Okay, I can imagine a dualist view surviving. I can imagine an idealist view surviving. I think physicalism is in trouble. I don't see a way. I mean, just look at the wacky reincarnation cases that I was talking about earlier. Like, if this data is correct, then it looks like it straightforwardly demonstrates that physicalism is false. That there's more to the world than the physical material.
Good answer. And if people could just email me in to explain that to me, and in the way a South Park episode would, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, good.
So
I would love to see a South Park episode on physicalism versus idealism. That would be great.
There might be one already, honestly.
There might be.
So I learned all about the Mormon religion through South Park. So
yeah.
Hello to any Mormons out there.
I'm taking Mormonism more seriously than ever now. I don't know what's going on there.
I went to see the Book of Mormon, one of the best things I've ever saw. Like,
yes, the musical, not the actual Book of Mormon.
Yes, oh, definitely musical. Yeah,
yeah.
Stay away if you've got the book.
Yeah.
Question from Chase. Stephen, during your presentation on alien agendas, the Prime Directive, and the problem of evil, how did you draw parallels between speculative ideas about extraterrestrial intelligence and more traditional philosophical dilemmas, like, is it theodicy and human free will? Did I say that right? Theodicy?
Yeah. How did I do it? Well, my background is in philosophy of religion, so I mean, that's my toolkit. That's what I've been thinking about my whole adult life. But one of the reasons, like, sometimes, I mean, you've expressed this puzzle, like, how did you get up to speed as fast as you did? Right? Like, I've only been paying attention for a year, a little more than a year now. And the answer is, well, it's actually because the kind of epistemological structure of this problem, which how the knowledge works, is essentially the same as it works in religious traditions. So, right, like, it's being driven. We're talking about things that are perceived in unusual ways or only by certain parties, and then we have to consider their testimony, and in particular, how their testimony stretches our worldview, right? So I've been thinking about the epistemology of miracle claims my whole life. I've been thinking about religious experiences my whole life. I've been thinking about all those kinds of things. And it just turns out that the UFO phenomenon and its surrounding culture operates basically exactly like a religious culture does, which other people have noted, right? Like, people have suggested that this is just a new kind of religion. And sometimes that's taken to be dismissive. I don't take that to be dismissive at all. I take all religions very seriously. So yeah, that's how I saw it. I was just thinking about why are these things, which seem to be mostly leaving us alone, why are they mostly leaving us alone? And, in particular, why aren't they helping with some of these big problems, was something that I, pretty quickly came to, right? Like, if they could stop. So if whoever controls the flying saucers could have evacuated Auschwitz, right? They could have just gone in there and taken everybody out and just left the Nazis suck it, right? They could have just saved everybody, and they didn't, right? So like, this is an actual instance of the problem of evil. Like, what was the motivational structure of the beings who decided that they would fly this wave of strange glowing objects over Washington, D.C. in 1952? But they didn't stop the Holocaust. Why would they do that?
I think even to the same point, I've not heard that one used before, which is very relevant, but the nuclear weapons thing is always brought up, and it's like, well, what about Hiroshima? What about Nagasaki? They could have just stopped those, and they didn't.
Yeah, that's right. And this just goes everywhere, right? Like, why don't they solve the droughts that people, like, why aren't they saving the people in Florida right now, right? So it's just the problem of evil. So the answer, presumably, is not going to be much different from what the theologians who have been defending this the whole time have been saying, which is that there is some value placed on autonomy and independence for various reasons. And so, yeah, it just seemed like a very natural connection to make.
question for you now from Dave Smethurst. Dave, thank you for all the questions you sent in. I've picked this one to ask, and I hope it's relevant because I don't know if Stephen, I may have asked you before. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Michael Masters?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And did you hear recently so I'll ask the question. What did Steve make of the profound experience Michael Masters describes at a UFO conference when two delegates were purportedly taken over by non-human intelligence and then directly channeled a message to Masters telepathically? I believe Masters, and it also seems to link to ideas of something coming. What's Steve's take on these things?
So I know about Masters, and I know kind of where he is situated in the UAP space. Like he
Sure.
has this view about time travel that I don't agree with.
Future humans, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's correct. But we've already talked about this, so I won't reiterate. But I have not heard of this case though. So I don't know what happened. What's the
I've not seen the details myself. I just know about that element. But what I would then ask you then, if you could talk around the idea of channeling, so the idea that people can, and this is where the religion thing does really cross over for me, and it's an element of religion I've got an issue with. So when you see a video, and this is where I try to be really fair, and I could sit here and just say everything UFO is positive and true and everything else. But when you see a video of some kind of evangelical priest or preacher and they're walking around healing people, touching their heads, and all these folk are jumping about a church and they're shaking violently and throwing themselves into people, and similar thing that there are people who say they are taken over by NHI and literally channel these beings, and they will pass on messages either physically, verbally, or telepathically to other people. How do you view that? Is it literally just the same way someone being taken over by a demonic entity or an angelic entity or whatever it would be?
So let me just give you where my background assumptions are at this point, right? So I assume that UAP are real. I assume that they are NHI. I assume that telepathy is real. I assume that reincarnation is real, right? So that's a heretical data set for the ordinary status quo worldview for the time being, or at least unless you hang out in India, in which case it's very normal. But okay, so it does seem to follow directly from my assumptions that should be possible, right? That it should be possible for a strongly telepathic being, whatever that means. And I don't mean that there's they might not have a physical body. They might be purely extra dimensional. Like who knows what they are, right? But a strongly telepathic body could implant ideas into your mind. That seems pretty straightforward. That's just what telepathy is, right? Like I can project ideas into your mind. So if I'm really good at that, I could project a lot of ideas and I might be able to flood you and essentially control your body. And again, like this is not hypothetical. So like, the stuff that Elon is building, the Neuralink stuff, is designed to send signals from the motor cortex, which moves your limbs, right, into a computer so you can move a mouse. Well, you could just fix that, or transmit it. Like I could put a thing into your arm and then I could think arm move and your arm could move, right? Like that's, again, like obviously possible at this point. So there's no reason in principle to rule these things out. And then, I'm a person who takes religious claims seriously. So I think that things like demonic possession are probably real. I just actually watched a video of an exorcism like yesterday. And like, I mean, I don't know how to resist that. Like if there's these strong telepathic beings, and we're these kind of weak telepathic beings, it seems kind of obvious that they should be able to override us under certain circumstances, right? They could short circuit the way our brains normally work, or our souls normally work. I don't understand the relationship between brains and souls anymore. Not that I ever really did, but yeah. So as far as my advice would be, and this is a good thing to talk about in general, like as we enter into this very, very bizarre world of considering these things that we have most all of us have been ignoring, certainly here in the West. How do I think about this? Like, should I be worried about these things? Should I be worried about demon possession? Should I be worried about being deceived by an evil spirit? And the answer is yeah. how do you respond to that? Well, actually, the great religious traditions have always told you how to respond to this, right? Like you check the message, like you check your values, right? Like what are you being told to do? Are you being told things that are not consistent with your high spiritual moral principles? Then don't trust that thing, right? If what they're telling you is love your neighbor and feed the poor and take care of the widows and orphans, then then they're probably not bad, right? They're probably, if we use the angel demon terminology, right? If a being shows up and says, take care of the widows and orphans, pay attention to the migrants, heal the sick, feed the poor, that's an angel. If they show up and say, I've got the keys of power for you, and I'm going to help you get what you want, and I'm going to help you get that thing that you want to control, I'm going to help you control that. But that's a demon, right? Like that's by definition what the difference is. Like the background of like what type of thing they are, like whether they are like extraterrestrials or like none of that matters. The difference between angel and demon is value, it's agenda, it's what they're telling you to do. So like if it looks like an angel and it's telling you it's going to give you all power, it's a demon. Like that's what the traditions here have always said, that the pretty surface value stuff is not important, right? If it's ugly and has many eyes and wheels and arms and bulbous, but it's telling you to love your neighbor and pursue goodness and to kind of overcome your selfishness and like enter into this space of gratefulness and joy, that's not a demon. That's a very ugly angel, right? Like I'm sure you've seen these like biblically accurate angel memes, right? Like yeah, the surface features don't matter. The baseline biology or metaphysics doesn't matter. What matters is the moral, spiritual, ethical content. And that's all that matters. That's your only key.
Stephen, it's been almost 2 hours, and we could probably go a lot more, but I'm sure you've got stuff to get on with through your day.
I do.
I've got a little boy as well who's desperate to play FIFA with me. So we will call it a day there. It's been great talking with you as always, and I'm sure we can shoot for a 4th time, if not before Christmas.
Let's do it. I gotta get a T-shirt or something too. I need my merch.
Oh, I'll send one over.
Send me something to put on my shelf. I want my little That UFO podcast merch.
Cool. I'll give you it completely free. Just PayPal me $200.
Sounds good.
I'll post it to you.
I'll pay for shipping.
Yeah, I'll get something out. Yeah, I'll get something to you, mate. I will. Listen, one more thing, and like you mentioned, how can people view your stuff?
Yeah. Good. So now the answer is different than it was before. So now you go to thevisiblecollege.org. And at the bottom of that is a link to our YouTube channel. We also have a modest presence on X right now. I'm not in charge of social media, so we're going to try to branch out there a little bit. So the website itself and YouTube channel and social media stuff. I also still have my own personal YouTube channel, Steven Brown Philosophy, where I did post this video because I wanted it to go alongside the other ones. But yeah, those are the things to check out.
I have just followed you. So, folks, the Visible College only has 20 followers right now. Yeah. I'm sure we can get that to 25 or 30 by the end of the month.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen.
Go follow at Viz College, VIS College, and I'll stick all those links in the description as well. Make sure you check it out. There's always space for academic scientists and the whatnot to get involved and think of this topic in a different way. So, I appreciate, Stephen, what you're doing and that you've stuck around.
Absolutely.
And one last question, yes or no?
Yeah.
Nazca mummies, aliens or not?
Yes or no? No, but I believe probably strong evidence of alien contact.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass.